We shall continue our working day at the UCMC and with the weekly updates on the security situation in Ukraine and the activities of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission from the Principal Deputy Chief Monitor, Mr. Alexander Hood.
Good afternoon, dear friends. The level of violence in eastern Ukraine remained mostly stable. As you can see on this graph here, there was in fact a slight decrease in the number of ceasefire violations recorded by the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission last week. This represents the 5th consecutive week we have recorded a decrease in the number of ceasefire violations. Now, dear friends, the reduction can at least partially be explained by the fact that the OSCE SMM has had restricted patrolling following the incident on 23rd April, during which we lost a colleague when his vehicle ran over an explosive device likely to have been a mine in non-government-controlled Priship. The restrictions have reduced the geographical scope of our patrols and have entailed grounding of our mid-range unmanned aerial vehicles, all of which means we are unable to monitor and report on facts, including on violations, to the extent that we usually do. Documenting conflict, however, is only one part of what the OSCE SMM does. We also try to prevent conflict. The OSCE SMM is essentially an early warning mechanism. Dear friends, I often think if we could have done something different, perhaps we could have identified the signs, perhaps with interventions, with dialogue facilitation, perhaps if we had been able to listen to people and feed their fears and concerns into the policy-making forums, both national and international, then perhaps much of the tragedy we subsequently have seen could have been avoided. I am particularly thinking about the violence that has taken over 10,000 lives in Donbass, but also the tragic events in Odessa 3 years ago to this week that took the lives of 48 people. Our teams in Odessa and elsewhere in Ukraine had only been in place a few weeks in May 2014 and had little time to counter long brewing tension and misunderstandings. Outside of Donbass since then, there has, thankfully, been a mostly stable and peaceful situation in the country. It's a reality that is rarely acknowledged. Only violence seems to make the headlines. But the most important story over the past 3 years is precisely the absence of violence in most of this country. Stability and normalization seen all across Ukraine outside the Donbass is the story that has gone largely underreported. Our teams have since deployment been tirelessly and quietly working to build and maintain peace. They are on the ground, in communities, among people every day. They listen to people's concerns and watch for signs of tension. When required, they intervene. In Odessa, for instance, this year, as they did last year, our monitors facilitated and organized dialogue to ensure calm surrounding events marking the tragedy in the city 3 years ago. Their work has gone unnoticed. In fact, the calm we saw this week in Odessa has largely gone unnoticed. Their success is the very reason their efforts get unnoticed. Dear friends, as I have often pointed out, that the defining feature of the conflict in Donbass is its volatility. While last week we recorded relatively few ceasefire violations, we know from experience that this can change very quickly. We did not record a single Minsk-proscribed explosion in the Yasinovata-Donetsk-Avdiivka triangle last week. Compare the situation in the same area in early February, when we recorded thousands of explosions on a daily basis. In an instant, such carnage can return. Obviously, if people in positions of power are determined to escalate, there is little that can be done. But often escalation comes from the ground. Often it is from fear, misunderstanding, anger, or ignorance. Identifying such early warning signs, like in Odessa and elsewhere in the country, requires presence among people. Presence in their homes, schools, and communities. It requires access. The restrictions imposed following the death of our colleague certainly have impacted our ability to record ceasefire violations. But the implications for early warning, dialogue facilitation, and ultimately the prevention of an even worse situation in Donbass are even more worrying now. The restrictions on our monitoring are self-imposed. We have almost 600 monitors in Luhansk and Donetsk region, and we have an obligation to mitigate risks, and we will continue to do so. We will do so long as the sites continue to fail to comply with their obligations. In particular, to demine, mark, and fence off mines and unexploded ordnance. We will continue to restrict our monitoring so long as the sites fail to abide by the Memorandum of 19 September 2014, which expressly prohibits the laying of mines and other explosive devices, and stipulates that all previously laid must be removed. We will continue to restrict our monitoring so long as the Joint Center for Control and Coordination fails to coordinate mine clearance as was set out in the Trilateral Contact Group decision of 3rd of March 2016. While the OSCE SMM imposed these restrictions in order to protect our unarmed civilian monitors, only the sites can lift them. Only the Joint Center for Control and Coordination can lift them. Only they can remove the threats to our monitors and the wider civilian population. Dear friends, last week yet again demonstrated that this is not an academic issue. We confirmed 10 cases of civilian casualties from mines and unexploded ordnance, 4 fatalities, 6 injuries, including a young boy. In addition, on 28 April, the safety of our monitors was threatened on 2 occasions with an explosion and small arms fire close to our patrols in Molodishne and Kruta Hora, both in areas not controlled by the government. Dear friends, we in the OSCE SMM are still in shock and mourning over the needless and tragic death of our colleague Joseph on 23rd of April. I can only imagine how his family and the families and the friends of those killed last week must feel too. Nothing will bring them back. But if we are not to see more tragedy, the sites must demine, and they must do it now. We in the OSCE SMN can take mitigation measures, and we do, but how does one mitigate against the danger posed by a curious child? How can you prevent him or her from running around through fields? How does one prevent him or her from picking up interesting and strange-looking objects? And if there is to be an end to this conflict, if people are going to talk and understand one another, I'm almost certain the OSCE SMM will be there to facilitate it. But first, the mines and other explosive devices must be removed. As usual, at the end of my statement, I would like to inform you about the latest mission numbers. As of today, the mission has 656 monitors, of whom 575 are deployed in the east. In addition, there are 343 colleagues, Ukrainian colleagues, and 87 other international staff working for the SMM. Thank you.
Дякую, пане Хук. Колеги журналісти, якщо у вас є запитання, прошу їх задавати.
If you have any questions, please, you're welcome to ask those.
Mr. Hook, what
Mr. Hook,
repatriated to United States, and can you provide us with more details about internal assessment of the ground? Thank you.
Thank you. Out of respect to the family of Joseph, I will not provide here any further detail. I can, however, confirm that the OSCE, the organization as such, has launched an internal investigation by its internal audit office. They are now at work. And the Secretary General of the OSCE itself has announced that he will organize an external forensic investigation.
Дуже дякую. На цьому ми брифінг завершимо. Наступна прес-подія по діяльності, про діяльність.
we will wrap up our press conference with Mr. Hook, and next statement will be delivered in a week.